Welcome, everyone. I was hoping we could do just very brief introductions so folks know who they're listening to. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a librarian at AADL. I'm in the collections department and select all of the adult fiction, but I also do a ton of programming for all ages, among other things. So happy to be here.
My name is Beth, and I'm a library technician and serve in the outreach team of the library.
I'm Elizabeth. I guess we'll get all the Elizabeths and Beths out of the way. Elizabeth S. I work in the archives department, and I do a ton of things as well. One of them being the discussions that I love to participate in.
My name is Marissa. I am also a library tech, and I work in outreach with Beth.
My name is Emily. I'm a librarian. I collect for kids fiction, but with most of the programming I'm doing, I'll be working more with adults.
My name is Lucy, and I am a library tech in the youth department. I do a lot of youth programming like story times, but adult programming as well.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I work on the desks.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. So today we are discussing the classic novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This was first published in 1937, but actually, I don't want to say went undiscovered, but definitely didn't really gain in popularity until Alice Walker kind of started a Zora Neale Hurston revival in 1975 with her publication In Search of Zora Neale Hurston. And that's when this book was really kind of catapulted into fame. And that kind of leads into my first question I wanted to open with is that this book is very commonly taught in high school or college literature classes. And I just wondered if for most of you, this was your first time reading it, or you had read it, in school at some point or when you were younger, and just kind of wanted to hear about that and what, how many times you've read it and what your experience was like, whether this was for the first time or maybe a secondary or third time.
For me, this was the first time. I had only started hearing Zora Neale Hurston's name a few years ago, so I had kind of been assuming she was a contemporary writer until maybe a year or two ago when I realized that she was before that.
Yeah, this was my first experience with it, which I thought was kind of weird. Like I had heard about it before. I know a lot of people who read it in high school and college as well. And I feel like I knew the whole story just based on things that other people had told me, but it was really good to read it for the first time. Like I said, shocked that I hadn't read it before. And I also kind of was with Marissa, not thinking that she was contemporary, but that she was like from the 60s. And then finding out that it was from the 30s was a huge surprise.
I read this book in undergrad, and I am so glad I got to read it again now, because I was reading it as an English major. So I was reading, 4 other books at the same time and was reading it just to get it done. And this time, oh my gosh, she's such a beautiful writer. And while I got the storyline and the beats and the things I needed to be able to write papers, I didn't really appreciate the literature. And this reread was just wow.
Yeah, I read it in college and I read it in high school, and those were both a long time ago. And I've read it like a number of times actually since then. It's been a while. I love this book. So this time around, I decided to listen to it, which I had never done before. And that was really interesting. It's narrated by a woman named Ruby Dee, and I kind of focused on totally different things listening to the book, which was really interesting.
Did you say Ruby Dee?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she's an actor, well-known actress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I hadn't heard of it, didn't read it in high school or college, but I did read it after the film came out, which was I just looked up, 2005. So it was on TV. I think Oprah had produced it, and Halle Berry was in it. But so that's what prompted me to read it the first time years ago. But yeah, this time I was really struck by the beauty and like the love that the two of them had. It was really something, but go ahead.
Yeah, I too was assigned this book as a high schooler, and it went way over my head. So, 15, 20 years go by, and I had a chance to read it again last year and really enjoyed it, loved it. And I reread it this past week for this discussion, and it felt good to have that last year's reading under my belt so that I could really focus on a lot of the concepts in the book rather than plot, because there are a lot of deeply, existential, I would say, concepts, ideas, and feelings in this book that I just luxuriated in this time around.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to those who had read it in like an educational setting. I read it in an AP literature, I think, class in high school. But like Emily mentioned, we were reading a million things, right? And it was like in those classes, it's like a book a week. Like also you're in high school and like playing sports and like doing whatever else. So I honestly didn't remember the story at all. Like I think of it as a classic because I remember it being about an African-American woman in like the 30s. And that's like the extent of what my memory was. So like many of you, I really got to delve deeper into it this time. And I was super glad I did, which is one of the reasons I love these discussions, is because I probably wouldn't have picked up Their Eyes Were Watching God because I was like, well, I read it in high school. It wouldn't necessarily be high on my list of like, that's something I should reread, but I'm thrilled I did. So go ahead.
I was just, when you're in high school, there's nothing that you can really understand. I think even if you think you know what love is, or it's not evident as a younger person what the crux of the story was.
And there's a lot of nuance in the book, which we'll get into, that I think definitely went over my head as a younger person. And it was just beyond me trying to imagine, I don't know. There's just a lot as a very young person. I almost wish that they didn't teach this book to like high schoolers, because I just think it's like impossible to grasp. That's one thing I wrote down, why do they teach this in high school? Anyway, but I'm not an English teacher, so I'll leave that up to professional teachers. So I kind of wanted to move on and talk a little bit about the title, because I think there's some different interpretations of it, or perhaps maybe there's only one correct one, but I wanted to hear what everyone thought. To me, I really felt like I interpreted it most clearly towards the end when they're experiencing the hurricane and kind of talking about things being out of their hands. And, it's like up to, it's up to God now, basically. But I wanted to hear what other people thought. And I wanted to, I know that there's plenty of writing about this book, and you can look up meaning of the title and get tons of, people who've analyzed it. But I just wanted to hear what, you thought going in, and as the course of the book went on, how you were thinking about the title as you read.
So even though I'd read the book, I didn't remember some of the things. I didn't remember that she'd been married multiple times, and I didn't remember the court part at the end. I do remember the hurricane and all that. But so I couldn't really remember how the title came to pass, but once I read it in the book, the image for me was they said, I think they weren't watching the door, their eyes were watching God, because the hurricane was upon them. And yeah, it just struck me what that meant, maybe they're visually staring at the door, but really deep down it was, what's going to happen? A much bigger question.
I didn't think of this until you asked this question, Elizabeth, and I think you used some kind of phrase like destined. And that was something that really went through the whole book to me, because you learn in the first, the name Tea Cake comes up so early in the book, and he doesn't come in the book until so much later. But, there's these other love interests coming. So you feel that there's something else destined to happen. And I mean, I didn't put those together until right now, but I think that the idea of things being outside of the hands of the narrator and the story that we're hearing definitely comes into play.
It's funny. My wife asked me, well, what's the title about? And before I had reread it, my answer was, well, I think it has to do with the protagonist. What came to my mind was the image of Janie, the main character, returning to her hometown, the town of Eatonville, and the eyes of everyone sitting on their porch, wondering about her, gossiping about her. And there's a lot of, I think, the divine about Janie. So that was my answer. And then I had to go, oh, wait, sorry. No, that's not really the correct answer. I think, yeah, as Beth mentioned, there's this, maybe the moment when that phrase is used is toward the end, when people are experiencing a hurricane, an act of God, and up against the immensity of some natural force, right? But I think it's kind of woven through this like character who's very deeply spiritual. And so I think both answers could be right.
I saw in the intro to the version I read that there was like, that was one of the discussion questions. So I was thinking about it as I read. And I don't think I really have an answer, but I do think it kind of has to do with like the sense of amorality that runs through the book. Like, God is not a moral being in a sense. It's this outside force just rolling through, like the hurricane is how I interpreted it.
I think I kind of see it too as like these two threads in the book. One is like this destiny and what is going to happen, and then I think another really important part of the book is what Janie does for herself and what she goes out there and does to find what she needs. And I think in the end, she's sitting on the porch with Phoebe, and she says like, "There's two things you have to do to yourself. You have to, she says, just to get good with God, and you have to you have to figure out living for yourself." And so I saw it as like, there are some things that, you know, God is going to, that are God-given, like a hurricane. And then there are some things where you can't just sit and stay with this husband who, you know, is too old, or this husband who treats you like dirt. You have to find your living for yourself.
I agree with that, Lucy. And I think I agree with you too, Lauren, in the sense that I think there was kind of a dual meaning, because I feel like throughout the book, almost like Janie, there's a lot of ways that Janie acts very practically. And that to me is like her eyes on the door. You know, it's like, you know, she's like, all right, this second husband, like, you know, I have like a rich private life, but like he and I are not seeing eye to eye, and I'm going to like run the store and like, you know, do my best to live as best I can for myself, but also like be pretty practical. But then you always get the sense that she's kind of like, when tea cake comes along, like she's ready, you know, and she's like always looking forward to that next thing and like seeing what life might bring her. So I feel like it was kind of a dual meaning in my mind too, at least, of like her throughout the book, but also at the end, you know, that sentence was, Zora Neale Hurston wrote that sentence about watching the door versus watching God. Yeah, I just thought I agreed with it being about the protagonist to a certain extent.
When I first looked at it again, when the book and their eyes were watching God, that was the imagery was the porch scene and when she's coming back, because again, I'd seen the film too. So it was a real significant part of it. And yeah, I can see the duality of that title.
I think this kind of segues well into thinking about this being a feminist novel. It's referred to that in a lot of essays about the book. And I think, like, I personally would agree that it is, but also like the time and place and like where Janie is, there's still elements where, women are not empowered, especially Black women. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about whether you think this is a feminist novel, and how you kind of thought about her relationships with the men in her life and the other people in her life and all that throughout the book.
I mean, I very much think it's a feminist novel. Like that first sentence in the book, which always kind of or the first two paragraphs, which like always stops me in my tracks, which is part of the reason I listened to it this time. So I'm like, I'm not going to get past the first page. But, she's talking about men kind of just like being these watchers, right? Like, I see this thing sailing by me and it's out of my reach. Whereas women take what they remember what they need to remember, and they use that and they build a life with that. And so it's like these women are kind of they're controlling the process of their memory, whereas men aren't really coping adequately. So right in the beginning, I feel like she's just subverting gender stereotypes. And, then in the beginning, Janie also has that scene with like the tree. She's lying under the tree, I think, and it's very sensual. And she's like, this is what marriage is. And so I think in the back of her mind, she has this like feeling of what love can be, and whether or not she's always actively seeking it out in every part of the book. I think that this is a book about a woman who is getting what she is looking and getting what she wants. So I think that's the feminist part of it.
Yeah, I wanted to just, continue on along that thread of thought, since you mentioned the beginning of the book, Lucy. And this time I really paid attention to that beginning of the book, and setting the character of Janie up as this real seeker. She's a feminist. Yeah. And she's a real humanist in my definition of the term, which is just having to do with like really wanting to fully explore what makes you you and what makes you feel the way you feel. And I loved that part when she's noticing the bees pollinating the tree she's laying under as a young girl, and thinking, this is a marriage, right? This is what marriage is. and I liked when she is married off to someone early on as a girl, very shortly thereafter. And she realizes, wait, this isn't that feeling. I'm not getting that feeling. I know in my gut, this isn't marriage. This isn't what it could be. Although a lot of people might cope and might say, I don't know, like maybe it is. I don't know. I'll have to keep hanging in there. But no, she knew and she listened. And so right away, you get a sense that this person is she's like a powerful, questing human being. And I think that's what really makes it. And the fact that she's a woman, right, and she's a Black woman, and this is 1930s, and I forget who said at the outset of this discussion that it felt like this book was written in the 60s. I mean, yeah, like this is way ahead of its time, and there's a reason why Alice Walker, right, wrote that book the essay In Search of Zora Neale Hurston, and it was published in Ms. Magazine, if I'm not mistaken, in the 70s. Like this person, I think Alice Walker another writer, right, of a famous author. Woman author looked at this and said, like, this is worth everybody reading. And I'm really feeling that my second and third time through this book in a way that I didn't quite get as a high schooler.
I completely agree with both of you. And that made me struggle a little bit later on in the book, when there are a couple things Tea Cake does that just, I didn't want her to stand for it. I didn't want her to let him get away with taking her money and disappearing for a day and coming back and it being fine. I didn't want her to let him get away with beating her so that the guy would not think that he could come and take her. And I struggled with that a lot through the latter half of the book, because I knew that her and Tea Cake's love were what we were supposed to be rooting for. Mm-hmm. And I rooted for it mostly, but boy, I got real turned off to him for some of those things. And he does redeem himself as he's getting her through the storm. And the way he acts at the end is really, you know, explained by his medical condition. But I don't know. I struggled with the pure love story of it. And maybe we're meant to. It's certainly more interesting than a love story where in the end everything is perfect between the two of them. And more realistic probably too.
Yeah, you're right. Even though I said their love was so, you know, was amazing. I remember the thoughts too, like, dang, why did he have to do that? And I mean, but I also feel like that's just what was expected of, you know, it's just what marriages were often like, that the man was in charge, and if he had to slap you around, that was what you had to take. I don't know. I don't know if they're all like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? But yes, I didn't like that part. And also like, dang, don't gamble away the money, you know? And, but what I did really like about what I thought, and why I do believe it's a feminist book too, is just the power that she found within herself, and whether it was just to play checkers or to go fishing or any of the things that Tea Cake encouraged her to do, and saw her as an equal in a lot of ways, as a partner, except for those other times. But anyway.
I kind of mentioned like the sense of amorality running through the book before, and I think this is a really good example of that, because the author sets all these things up various times, like all these characters are interacting in ways that are not necessarily redeeming or painting the characters in a good light, but it is, like Beth said, that is the way that people behaved. So she is capturing the time, capturing the experiences of women. And I think in the end, she kind of steps outside of shaping herself through these relationships with men, because she's like, I'm in my room, it's my room, and I have my whole life ahead of me. So like this love story that she's had is not actually the thing defining her.
Mm-hmm. There were a few times in the book, because I didn't remember it well, that I was like very surprised. Like when Janie just like walks away from her first marriage, I was like, wow, like I did not. And then there's like not really any repercussions. Like he doesn't come, like I was like, wow, this is like, what a strong thing to do. Like you were kind of forced into this. You're young. This dude is way older than you. You're not happy. And like, I thought that was like, I was like amazed by that. I was like, she just like found someone she liked better and just like literally walked down the road, you know? But then I found that to be frustrating when she did get to be with Tea Cake. I'm like, you literally like walked away from a husband with like nothing but like a little luggage. Like, but now you're like sitting in a chair, like wringing your hands while he's taking your money and has like gone for 48 hours. And I do agree that that was like more how it was, but I still don't fully understand why Zora Neale Hurston felt the need to write it that way. Cause I'm like, are we supposed to think that this was like an amazing love between her and Tea Cake? And if it was, like, why couldn't he just not do those two things? Like, that doesn't mean that they didn't have challenges or like she couldn't have written about like jealousy issues, but like, why did he have to take her money? And also why did he have to like be violent with her? I guess I still don't quite understand the point of that. And if the point of the book is like getting to Tea Cake and getting to that relationship. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have any degrees in literary criticism, so I don't know. But that was something that I still closed the book and I was like, that doesn't all quite add up to me.
I think it's like really hard to read a book and not put yourself in the book. And, you know, like a lot of this book, I think it's about their love, but it's also about Jamie's finding this person that she loves. And so I think that's kind of like, he does these things, but she still loves him. And I like the money, I feel like she walked away from Jodie Stark's, like she didn't, I mean, after Jodie Stark died, but she walked away from that life of that money. I don't think she cared about the money the way I read it. I think she cared because she felt like she'd been, this wasn't really the love she thought it was. Like, look, he's gone. And I know he's gone because he took the money and now he's gonna be able to fund whatever he's doing out there. Yeah, the being violent with her, I think that's a little bit harder to reconcile, but it's like, it's also kind of like, well, it's not me. I mean, she chose to stay, you know, that's her choice. And I think her, like, I just see it as her love for Tea Cake is like, she just loves all of him. So
yeah, it's kind of beyond like whatever,
right.
You know.
Yeah. And all we know, like Tea Cake's love, I mean, Tea Cake, we know he loves her because he tells her, like, you're it, you got the keys to the kingdom, you're the one, you know. But we're really getting the book from the point of view more of Jamie, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely read that whole problem with the $200 that Tea Cake steal or takes, right, without Janie's knowledge, and then ghosts her, as a problem mainly for Janie, as I don't know if this guy actually loves me. She wasn't really worried about the money so much as, where is he? Am I going to end up like ashamed and alone? And will everyone kind of, she has these, almost begins to build, because there's that rather other example of someone who that happened to, and the problem of age, right? She's much older than Tea Cake, and she's wondering, hey, is he just some young stud who's hustling me out of my money and he doesn't actually love me? There's something kind of interesting there going on when he says, afterward he comes back and he's won back her money, you know, and he's hurt because he's been gambling and there's been some violence. And he says, well, the reason why, when she expresses an interest in actually like being there, like, why did you put on this awesome party with my $200? And, you know, why didn't you invite me? I wanted to come. And he said, oh, I wasn't sure you were that kind of woman. Like, but because I was hanging out with railroad people, you know, like the low class folks. And she says, no, like, I want to be there. And he says, okay. And then he takes her at her word, and they go on to the muck, right? Go down and work with a lot of like working class people, and do hard labor basically, and make a lot of good money at it. But they're doing a lot of, she's in overalls right next to him at the end. And I really loved that transformation. And so something good came out of that. I kind of put on, as to that other issue though, with the beating, Tea Cake does, he beats Janie out of jealousy, right? Is to sort of like make a point, because there's this other problem of some man maybe horning in, or possibly, you know, attracted to Janie, and Tea Cake is making a point almost to like everyone else, not to Janie, but he's making a point to the community of people who are present, like, she's mine, okay? And it prompts a very strange, to my ears, like discussion among the men folk of, wow, like, you know, you can beat your woman. Wow. Like, if I beat my woman, she's a strong woman with multiple jaws, and she wouldn't stand for that. Like, and you have this nice, beautiful woman who you can beat, and look at those like marks on her. It's very strange to me to read something like that. But I was almost reading that from like I wondered if this was like almost like an anthropological, like, you know, a perspective of like, you know, this is how this was discussed. Perhaps I don't know, but I wonder if this was how relations were. There's something kind of, there's an interesting detail that I wondered what you all thought of, where upon beating her, after Tea Cake beats her, you know, they're all working in whatever out in the hot sun, and talk with this community of people who all kind of know Tea Cake and Janie, and they're very popular. The men see how Janie is like hugging him or so close to Tea Cake after this happened, and they get a notion. And the women are watching Tea Cake after this happened, and he's fawning all over her, almost like making it up to her, kind of. And they are getting thoughts in their minds as they see this. I wondered what people thought of that, or if that was a detail that stood out to me as like, this is complicated.
I don't really have like a follow-up to that question, but I did want to point out just quickly that Zora was actually an anthropologist. And I think that like, that is a huge aspect, like a really good point to make, Lauren, that she's putting these conversations with men, both Black men and white men. Like there's this group of white men outside the courthouse in the end that are talking to really like illustrate societal values at that time.
And I think that happens throughout the book. I'm thinking about Mrs. Turner, who's a Black woman who runs, I think, a restaurant kind of in the muck or whatever. And she is like always coming over to Janie's house to talk with her about how much she hates Black people and how she like thinks that like one of the reasons that like she likes Janie is because she's lighter skinned. And I was reading that and I was like, I think that like Zora Neale Hurston has met or like knows that people like this exist and wants to like share this kind of anthropological viewpoint, like that there was that's a thought that, you know, that's a type of person that truly existed in that time. And I completely agree with you, Lauren. I think that some of the like the scenes about the beating and stuff that was I think that was kind of anthropological, that may very well have been like something Zora witnessed or experienced or like knows was the case. And like, it was common at that time.
And I think we get a lot of that, like the anthropological parts of the book. And I really noticed this when I listened to it, but it's like all this porch talk, right? It's like this Greek chorus almost of, and there are women in the beginning too, who are talking about Janie and where she's been, and they want Phoebe to go get the information for them. But it's always like this group of people watching Janie and TK or Janie and whoever she's with, and then telling us what they're seeing. But then even beyond that, there's these other stories that take place that this group of men are talking about, like the whole thing with the mule and it's just, and I guess when I've read it before, I've been so entranced by like the love story aspect of it and the language describing that. So that when I listened to it, I was like, wow, a big part of this book is this porch talk. Like it really stuck out to me when I listened to it. And I think that's an interesting way as an anthropologist to sort of relay to your reader what is going on.
Yeah, Lucy, I wanted to talk about that. Thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to talk about Hurston's use of the vernacular dialect to like how we understand Janie and the other characters, and how the speech patterns kind of reveal like the natures of the communities that Janie's in. I just wanted to talk about that because that is a huge part of the book, is like the types of conversations and the way that people are speaking. And I just thought that it's such an important point in the book, and I wanted to talk more about that. So I guess I don't have a question, but just tagging on to Lucy's comment that's something I wanted to touch on in this discussion.
I initially really struggled with reading the vernacular, not like that I didn't think it belonged there, but just getting the rhythm of the dialogue as I was going. And I think it was almost like when you are learning new vocabulary and then you see it in use enough, and then it's like, it's just there, because the rhythms got a lot easier for me in the end. And I don't think anything changed other than me becoming more familiar with it. But I don't know about the edition you all read, but the one I did had a prologue, or not a prologue, but an essay written by another person at the beginning. And they were talking about reading this book in a class learning English and how speaking those out loud. And I thought that was such an interesting thing. And I wonder whether this is totally tangential, so we can just breeze right by it. But how does reading vernacular when you're still immersing yourself in the language, does it help you jump in and feel more of the people, or does it make it harder to learn? And I'm kind of curious how other people handled reading it yourselves too.
I just wanted to say that as a high school student, I can't remember what I did, but when I read this book, but this time around, these past 2 times recently, I needed to read things out loud. I needed to read exchanges out loud, and I just wanted to. I wanted to like feel these words on like spoken out loud. And so I think it would be really interesting to listen to this being read professionally, but also I really enjoyed that and that aspect of it. And I love like playing with language personally. So it was awesome to read, words that were not in the dictionary, but I could feel like a vibe from the words. And there was a word that wasn't in like a dialect. It was just written right around the time. It's when Janie is wondering where tea cake has gone and he's taken her money, and she's going downstairs in this boarding house that she's at and having coffee with the landlady. And afterwards she sankles, Sankles, back to her room. And I was like, what's that? And it's not a word. It's not in the dictionary, at least, but I feel I understand the vibe of that word. And it's awesome to read this book out loud. I guess that's all I'm trying to say.
I read out loud a lot too. I just wanted to comment that, like, in my head, I would read a sentence and maybe not quite grasp it. And it would be helpful for me, like, just under my breath to like read out loud, and then I would form the connections of what the words were and all that. And I thought it was a really like valuable experience. And also I did feel like by the end of the book, I was getting more into the rhythm and understanding. And that was kind of cool for me to realize that like I had kind of learned how people were sounding, and I could, in my head, it was almost like reading a different language. I don't speak a different language now, but I used to be able to speak Spanish pretty well. And like when I remember those moments when like you're reading it and then all of a sudden you're not translating word for word, it's like coming together. And I like got to that. And I was like really happy at the end of the book because it was a really cool experience.
One of the things about the dialect, which, at the beginning, I have the same copy, Emily, probably, where there's an essay, but we're reminded that the story is Janie telling, reflecting what happened. So like, it's a lot to say, to her friend on the porch, but so, it's her reflecting back on what had transpired. So she maintained the dialect of herself,
I also struggled with a lot of the words. Like Lucy, I ended up listening to most of this book, which I would recommend if anybody else is struggling, just because it's not necessarily accessible right off the bat. And I did end up reading a lot out loud and then just ended up listening to it because I really liked the narrator a lot. But there's something to be said just for seeing how it's written. I also like language. Like I know that dat with a DAT has like roots, certain like pronunciations have like certain roots in African languages. And so like thinking about that is cool. To like see it written down is also an experience instead of just like hearing it and not necessarily thinking about how I would write it down. I don't know. The language was interesting all around.
Yeah.
And Beth, you had commented too, like the stories, like the story about the mule and stuff. It was just really, what am I trying to say? I felt like it was very immersive to feel like I was there hearing, this book was very visual to me. I've like pictured a lot while I was reading it. And I think the dialect and vernacular really helped with that, because I felt immersed in the story. And like the mule thing, and to me it was like sort of weird. Like I didn't really think it was funny, but I understood because I felt like I was there, like how like a town can like kind of have almost like an inside joke and it's like builds up. And so it was just, I thought it was helpful the way the book was written to feel like I was immersing myself in it. Anyway. Let's see, I have a few more questions here, but I know we're getting close to being out of time, and we've covered a lot. So I kind of wanted to talk about the ending and what Janie's like at the end versus the beginning of the book. I know she's aged. It's been like, it covers like 25 or more years. But also the ending is like pretty surprising, the last 10 pages with Tea Cake's death and how he passes. And then Janie's briefly has to go to on trial. And it was just, it was a lot. And I just wanted to kind of talk about the ending before we sign off.
Yeah, it was a lot. The whole, I mean, yeah, I'm glad it ended the way it did as far as in the trial. The part I thought was interesting was all the, the big funeral and stuff that she ended up having. And because I guess it was hard to reconcile, like living in the muck, and knowing that you got this money somewhere, and that she wanted to really, have a really beautiful send off, which I mean was lovely, but just that they live so simply, it just seemed like, wow, that's really over the top kind of for the kind of lifestyle they had.
I got the sense she almost had to go over the top to remind the community that she really cared for Tea Cake, because it did seem in the trial scenes that she, and you could understand the townspeople who weren't right there with her and, knew that she pulled a trigger. You can understand that. And so I think it was her way of showing that she really felt that love. But I thought it was interesting that she wore overalls. And I'm sorry to just pull out the book here, but I just thought this was so amazing. No expensive veils and robes for Janie this time. She went on in her overalls. She was too busy feeling grief to dress like grief. And that too busy feeling grief to dress like grief, just, you could feel her love and her loss right in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really an interesting contrast to the previous man she buries, right? Where she dresses in mourning clothing because that's what you all expected me to do, is what she says, like, I did that for you all. That's really interesting. And it shows that she did find someone who she truly loved, Yeah,
I said earlier that like her life is shaped by men throughout the story. And then at the end, she's kind of on her own and like sees this new horizon of like her whole life is ahead of her, even though she's lived all these different lives already. And I think in Tea Cake, although she is kind of influenced by him to a great extent, it's a partnership, and he allows her to experience things that she wants to experience. Like Lauren was talking about how he wanted to include her in all the partying and things that went on after she said that she wanted to, whereas in her past relationships, she had no say. It was just, you do what I say you do, and that's it. So I saw a lot happen for her, like, even though there were these contentious issues with Tea Cake at times, that was a real partnership in that sense.
I was sort of sad that there was so much packed into the last like 20 pages. I don't want to say nothing happened before that, but the pacing was so slow, slice of life kind of story. And then it's all of these things packed in when there's so much to unpack. Like, I think at one point she's talking about the jury and how she wishes that if there were women on the jury, that they would understand in a way that like the men jurors wouldn't, and just all about her love. There's just so much like packed in there that I wish it had been expanded more.
I don't have a developed thought here, but I mean, just thinking about what you just said, Marissa, a little bit about how much action is packed into the last little bit of the book. I mean, I will say that I felt like this book moves at a nice brisk clip throughout. But there is just so much to unpack in my mind when it comes to kind of black-white relations, the racial issues that come to a head in the courtroom. There's a lot of, to my mind, weird stuff that happens And one of which is that image of the sense that I got upon reading it this time, that the, all white jury and the all white power, people holding the power, wielding the power in that room during Janie's trial, are all kind of like, they're with Janie. And the people who you would expect to be with Janie are not with Janie.
Yeah.
And the people who at the end of the court's verdict who surround Janie are these strange, unfamiliar white women who form like a fortress, or I forget the phrase that Zora Neale Hurston uses to describe the way they are sort of protecting Janie, is the sense I got from the Black community. It was weird to me. It was weird that that was the way it was phrased. I'm thinking a lot about that. But I almost think, Marissa, that that's deliberate upon Hurston's part to write it the way she wrote it, right? This story mostly is about, this woman and her community of Black people and different and interacting with mostly like, members of a community, not white people. This isn't like about white people and Black people and the white-Black, whatever, race relations. This isn't that book. And it's just like, but I think it's touched on in this way of like, wow, what, there's complexity here and we know it. And it's, I'm sure hundreds of dissertations have been written about this book and maybe just that scene, cause it's meaty, and weird to my, isn't the word that comes up for me. But at the end of the day, like, it's part of the arc, right? Of like, okay, Janie is becoming, it isn't about a love story. And this book isn't really about just Janie's relations to different men. It's about finding herself, and like, it starts with that strong, to my mind, image of her walking back home, back to her home community as this fully actualized human being, this fully actualized woman, right? And it ends that way too. And I love that, like, that arc of it. So I love the ending for that reason.
Yeah, I did think there was a lot to interpret with like the courtroom stuff. And also I was like so surprised that Tea Cake's friends all turned against Janie. But I think whoever said like they didn't realize the full story, it was probably true. Like they just knew that their friend had been shot by his wife. So they were probably just upset, but that was surprising to me. I think there is a lot to unpack there, which I'm still kind of honestly thinking about and just kind of interpreting. But I do think that the book, like, it's ultimately Janie's story, right? And, she comes back and tells it to Phoebe, and like, you do get the sense she's going to be okay, because she always has kind of powered through and she's had tons of ups and downs. And it's just like the whole book is kind of just a portrait of a life, right? And like I think she's had like a more wilder things have happened to her than have happened to me. But it's still just a portrait of a life of a like Black woman in America in the late 30s, and a strong person too, who's going to be okay, and she goes up into her house at the end, and like, I kind of wish there was a sequel. I'm like, what is her next 25 years? Like, what's going to happen? I mean, I think there is a lot to unpack at the end, and I agree it happened fast, but I do think thinking about her just like walking upstairs at the end, you do get the sense she's going to be okay. And she's going to continue kind of going for that next horizon, whatever that might be for her at a given time.
Yeah, I love the way this book, like speaking of the horizon a little bit at the end, like one of the many things I love about this book, the very, very end, like the last sentence this book is perfectly encapsulated in these two bookends. Like the very first sentence, we're talking about the horizon, and the very last sentence, we're talking about the horizon in different ways. But it's just, I don't know, to me, it's just like this beautiful way to kind of say, okay, here's this life, here's this bit of this life we've given you in this bracket of, I don't know, these great, like just looking at it from like the way the sentences are written point of view. I don't know. I just love that about this book. That I think she does that so well. Just these kind of bookends.
Yeah, she also was planning to make a big garden, she said, too. Like TK had.
Yeah.
So she was making choices. She was looking at the future and recognizing how, like, what she is able to accomplish with her own hands, I wonder if somebody has written a sequel, the way people write sequels sometimes. Have you heard of one or anything after this? Okay.
I mean, I know Zora Neale Hurston continued to write, but I don't think there was ever anything related to this book. So it's up to us to just imagine. Well, we are almost out of time. I don't want to cut anyone off. If anyone has a final comment, I'll give just a few seconds of space here if you feel like you didn't get to say something you wanted to say. All right, awesome. Well, thank you all for participating. I really appreciate it. And thanks to anyone who tuned in to listen. Next time, let's see, I believe we're discussing Black Leopard, Red Wolf next, a sci-fi title. So that will be our next BLM discussion. And that's happening next month. And then it will air sometime after recording. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.